Hey, good afternoon, Roto Grinders, and welcome to the Number Fire NFL Regrind Show. I'm your host, Chris Jamino, joining you today to bring you a recap of all the action in week number 5 in the NFL. And joining me to do so are two of the sharpest minds in the fantasy football industry, JJ Zacharyson, the editor-in-chief of Number Fire. What's going on, JJ?
Not too much, man. I'm glad that we were able to escape a week of fantasy football without major injuries. That's always a plus, and we got that in week 5.
I think Cody Kessler was injured, right? I thought you said no major injuries.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Touche.
And also joining us from Number Fire, staff writer Jim Sonis. Jim, what's going on, man?
You joke about Cody Kessler, but he has the highest success rate on the Browns this year, and he's a future Hall of Famer. So I don't know why. I can't tell if that was a joke or not.
I don't make jokes. I don't know if you've heard. I'm all business. I'm completely serious about Cody Kessler and the Browns. Of course, we're going to recap all the action, including the Browns here in week number 5. That's what we do on the show. We'll look back and take a look at all the Charlie Whitehursts of the world, all the Jeremy Hills of the world, and all the other things that made and broke your lineups here in week number 5. Before we jump into that, I just want to take a minute to share with the audience here some of the magic you can find over at numberfire.com. JJ, tell us about Number Fire. I know you guys are really intimately involved in the process over there. You really make it happen for all the users who are on that site on a daily basis, including myself. What's going on at Number Fire?
Yeah, so we have content that's always out there, whether it's free or premium, lots of free stuff that you can simply sign up for free and read. But we also have a lot of stuff for our premium members in terms of tools to make your DFS lineups better, whether you want to look at trends and how market shares are changing for a certain player over X amount of weeks, over the past X amount of weeks, or whether you want to look at net expected points metric and dig a little bit deeper than what the box score is saying to show how a player actually is performing according to this proprietary metric that we use called net expected points versus his yardage or his touchdowns or things that you can see kind of anywhere else. So we kind of combine the advanced analytics with some of the stuff that you can see in box scores, but we take it to kind of a different level to enhance your lineup building experience. And then from there, we do have tools to help you build a lineup on the site itself. So all of that's there for our premium members. And even if you don't want to spend the money, if you want to just be a free member, there is stuff for you as well over at numberfire.com. So definitely check it out.
Yep, and not the least of which are some of the articles that I see from Jim on a weekly basis. Jim, I know you're putting out some good stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly looking at matchups, stuff like that. We'll have one tomorrow on market share reports, looking at, carry market shares, target market shares, and also red zone usage and stuff like that. But like JJ said, the free stuff is really cool too. One of my favorite ones is our games and lineups page, which has all the information from Vegas. It has, prices for each player on every site, and also has a look at weather too, which was big yesterday. It showed early in the week that Baltimore-Washington game would be pretty gross. So check out the wind speed, stuff like that early in the week so you know which games to check on Sunday morning. And it can kind of help you know which games are going to be red flagged once Sunday rolls around.
Yeah, there were a couple of games where it was definitely probably at least a marginal factor, if not a big factor. So definitely check out everything over at numberfire.com, guys. It's a great site. Helps me a lot every week. It should be able to help you too. Looking back on week 5, though, it was I don't want to say it was a strange week because a lot of what we expected to happen did happen, but there's always some surprises in the NFL, always some things that we can take away that we maybe didn't expect. And certainly one of those things that was not a surprise to us at all on Thursday, Jim, was David Johnson and the Arizona Cardinals. They took it to the San Francisco 49ers. It was a score of 33-21, and David Johnson got the rock a bunch as we expected.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of showed that David Johnson may be one of those very few running backs who is not dependent on a super efficient quarterback to be a good fantasy option, because I like to tie my running backs to efficient quarterbacks. Drew Stanton is not that. He had 29 dropbacks on Thursday. Only 9 of them were successful according to Number Fire's metrics. Not great, but, David Johnson still was just disgusting. And I think that his involvement in the passing game and also his solid abilities on the ground too make him so safe, and it gives him a tremendous upside. I am a bit worried about their offensive line. Evan Mathis is hurt, and another one of their players up front is hurt too. So that's a bit of a worrisome thing. But I think that, again, David Johnson is one of those players who can thrive no matter what the situation is, especially now that Chris Johnson isn't there to pilfer away goal line carries too.
Yeah, I think it was Upati who's the other guy you're thinking of who may be out. But JJ, Larry Fitzgerald didn't seem to be affected by Carson Palmer being out, do you think that was really a matchup thing, or do you think that this is something, if Stanton has to play again, that we can expect to continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a matchup thing. It's also, I mean, you look at what else is going on in the wide receiving group there in Arizona. I think it's just a de facto thing for Larry Fitzgerald. Michael Floyd's playing really poorly. He's not seeing the field. He's only on the field for 34% of the team snaps on Thursday. I think that a backup quarterback like Stanton is going to go to more of the sure thing in Larry Fitzgerald. So, I'm not going to expect that type of production if Stanton were to be under center, in the upcoming weeks. But at the same time, it makes sense that he was the guy that was going to produce if any of those guys were going to produce this past week.
It's going to be disappointing, Jim, to not see Colin Kaepernick's afro on the sidelines, as he's probably going to be playing in the coming week here. It looks like the Niners are considering a quarterback change. How do you think that's going to play out?
I mean, it can't get any worse, so why not? I mean, at this point, if we've seen Colin Kaepernick succeed in the past, I know it's been a while, but what do you have to lose at this point? I guess the one thing that it could change is the market share for the 49ers, because with Blaine Gabbert under center, I guess in shotgun for them, Jeremy Curley has a 30% market share. It's hard to predict how that will play out if they do make the change over to Colin Kaepernick. Curley did, though, play 100% of the snaps for the first time in this year back on Thursday night. But I think that regardless of who you see at quarterback, it's still going to be the Carlos Hyde show. He played 82% of the snaps. He's second in the league in red zone carries with 23. The problem is, I'm not sure how many red zone trips they'll be able to generate coming up in week 6, but if they're at home in an okay matchup, Carlos Hyde is going to have an okay ceiling just because they seem to lean so heavily on him in the red zone.
Yep, definitely, make sure that we're taking a look at Carlos Hyde move forward. I mean, there's going to be situations where he's going to be in matchups we can use him, that's for sure. JJ, any thoughts on Curley? I know Jim mentioned him, and he got 13 targets this past week.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it makes sense within this Chip Kelly offense. He's going to be playing in the slot. We've seen other guys succeed in a way in that position. Those guys that can stretch the field as well. So I can kind of understand it. The market share on Thursday night was ridiculous. He had 13 targets. Quentin Patton had 2, and then every other wide receiver on the team had 1 or 0. I mean, Streeter and Torrey Smith both had 1. So, I mean, it's interesting for sure. Curley definitely has the highest floor of all the wide receivers, but again, you're talking about wide receivers on the San Francisco team that really isn't going to be generating a great passing offense.
Yep. So moving on to the next game here. Out in Pittsburgh, it was your Steelers, JJ, taking it to the Jets 31-13. And you can say that Sammy Coates dropped in with a big game, also with 5 drops. Talk about that mixed performance there for Coates. I mean, for fantasy purposes, we don't care about the drops, but certainly it's concerning if he's going to be involved in this offense in the future.
Yeah, so, the thing with Sammy Coates is you're going to have to take the good with the bad. He's a very, very inconsistent and raw wide receiver. He was coming out of school as well. He had a fantastic matchup this week. It's one of the worst, if not the worst, secondaries right now in football, especially with the injury that they had back there. So it made sense that he had a good game. The Steelers were at home where they always put up points. And look, if you look at the competition at wide receiver for the Steelers, it's Marcus Wheaton, it's Eli Rogers, it's Sammy Coates. Eli Rogers isn't going to be playing on the outside. Marcus Wheaton is not a very effective wide receiver. They moved him to the slot this past week. He actually played more snaps than Sammy Coates did in this game. But when Eli Rogers comes back, it's going to be very interesting to see not what happens to Sammy Coates, I don't think, anymore. It's going to be more interesting to see what happens to Marcus Wheaton, because I think Marcus Wheaton could be kind of relegated to being the number 4 guy at wide receiver in the offense once Rodgers is back and he kind of moves to the slot. I think Sammy Coates is here to stay. I think that they need him on the outside. He can clearly stretch the field better than any other non-Antonio Brown wide out there, and that's really what they need in this offense right now. So to me, obviously, he could have had like 18 touchdowns yesterday, but I don't think it's much of a fluke that he had a big day, because it was coming from a regression standpoint as well.
Yep, it's just a situation where, you just kind of have to, like you said, take the good with the bad with a player like him. Certainly, if he's going to cost as cheap as he was yesterday, we're not going to complain about the drops. Jim, anything else from the Steelers side you want to make mention of?
No, I mean, just if we're talking about the Steelers, just Le'Veon Bell's floor is stupid. He was facing one of the best rush defenses in the league. They were without their right tackle, and he still had 20 carries, 11 targets. I mean, he had 20 carries for 66 yards, but he's still going to wind up being one of the most productive fantasy assets of the week just because of that passing game involvement. So, I mean, he's back to what he was 96% of the snaps. He is exactly what he was marketed to be.
So, other than that, the Steelers definitely were just a team that came through the way we expected them to for fantasy. It's going to be a situation for us to attack in the future. They look like an efficient offense that's going to sort of consolidate their targets week to week within just a couple of guys. JJ, talk about the Jets, though. It looks like Brandon Marshall is going to continue to get peppered with targets.
Yeah, and as he should. I mean, he's the most talented guy there for sure. Quincy Enunwa, I think that Quincy Enunwa just actually might have fit better with Eric Decker in this lineup the more that I thought about it, because they kind of were using him in that tight end role in a way. I know he was seeing some more slot looks, but without Decker there, he moves the outside a little bit more. He's still fine. He still has a decent floor, but maybe not as high of one or as high of a ceiling as I might have thought without Decker in that lineup. I think the big thing, though, in the Jets offense right now is the running back situation, where Bilal Powell has now outscored in PPR leagues Matt Forte in each of the last 3 weeks. It's 3 out of 5 weeks now where Powell has more fantasy points than Matt Forte. A lot of that has to do with game script, but at the same time, the Jets aren't playing that well. The Jets are going to see negative game scripts. There are some plus matchups moving forward where I think Matt Forte could have a day, but I don't think that Matt Forte is quite the fantasy asset that folks might have thought after watching those first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, this isn't health related, is it? I mean, at this point, I have to think that he's at least healthy enough that he could be getting more work if they wanted him to, right, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they said, is that his x-rays came out clean last week. So he's healthy, but like JJ said, it's all about game flow. And, Bilal Powell, it's not just that Forte is losing value, but Bilal Powell actually has a really, nice role in this offense when they're trailing. He's got 24 targets over the past 3 games. That's more than everybody on the team except for Marshall and Enunwa, and he's only one behind Enunwa over that time. Another nice game on Sunday. It looks like they'll probably be trailing again in week 6 I think they're playing Arizona Monday night. So, Bilal Powell is definitely in season-long play every time. I know he's not on the regular slate for DFS, but his role in this offense is a lot better than it looked the first 2 weeks, just because he will be so involved in that passing game.
All right, guys, so let's jump into the next game. It's the Patriots who took it to the Browns 33-13. Tom Brady didn't look all that angry to me, JJ, but he certainly looked efficient and ready to roll for NFL 2016.
Yeah, I was getting a lot of questions about whether to play Brady last week, both in season long and DFS, like as if Tom Brady would have rust, as if this guy who's been playing in the league for 15 years would show signs of rust. Against Cleveland especially, we kind of expected this to happen. We expected them to throw the ball a lot. The big thing for me with this Patriots offense is that they're going to throw the ball a lot. They're throwing the ball about 65% of the time. They did yesterday through the first 3 quarters. That really that limited LeGarrette Blount's upside. I know that he still saw a lot of carries, didn't play a lot of snaps. He was out-snapped by James White yesterday, which I think is what we're going to see more and more as we move forward within this offense. I think that's also a little bit scary for what could potentially happen when Dion Lewis returns, is that James White is not playing poorly. So he might limit that upside as well. And then obviously, the tight ends can beat Cleveland. Have been beating Cleveland all season long. The big thing to me was our boy Chris Hogan. We talked about him last week, seeing all those snaps. Clearly the number 2 wide on the offense, and he came through at 114 yards. I think he's a great guy to target moving forward, because he's kind of the forgotten man in that offense. And if some of those touchdowns go the wide receivers' way in a more positive plus matchup for wide receivers versus the tight ends, I think that Chris Hogan could be a really, really good GPP play moving forward.
Yeah, he looked good, dropped the leg all over the Browns defense yesterday. And Gronk, he's back because he looks like that wildling giant from Game of Thrones as he's running down the field, just like shedding people all over the place. So we can expect him to only improve as the season progresses here. I really like his prospects moving forward. Obviously, Martellus Bennett had a huge game. And in general, the Patriots are dangerous. They're extremely efficient. And the only challenge is going to be predicting who they're going to go to each and every week, because that's what they want. That's how they want to build their offense. They want to be multiple. The Browns, Jim, Charlie Whitehurst made an appearance in this game. Well, just talk about the Browns. They're still kind of a mess.
Yeah, and I think that it'll be a bigger mess if Kessler can't play. I know that it seemed like I was joking before, but he actually has been really solid this year. I mean, if you look at his number fire metrics, he's at 13 net expected points so far this year through the air. He's had a higher success rate than Josh McCown. I know that we were excited about Josh McCown when he became their quarterback, but I mean, Charlie Whitehurst, we know what he is, and it's not like he's like atrocious. He's not going to, destroy everything, but it is going to be a definite ding to guys like Terrell Pryor, like Gary Barnidge, and Isaiah Crowell, who have all had reasons for optimism here recently, especially Crowell on Sunday, 59% snap rate, despite trailing for most of that game. He had 3 targets. I think that from a usage standpoint, that was a pretty good game from Crowell, even if the results weren't that good. And talking about Gary Barnidge, too, his target total has increased every week this year, topping out at 8 in week 5. He played 97% of the snaps. So if Kessler is okay, and it sounds like the x-rays were at least encouraging Monday, then, there could be times to use assets on this Browns offense. I just think that would kind of plummet if Whitehurst winds up being the quarterback.
Yeah, you mentioned Barnidge, 8 targets this past weekend, but the touchdown was not to be vultured by Connor Hamlet.
Yeah.
Geez, I'm sorry. Hashtag dad jokes, guys. Anything else in this game, JJ? I mean, not too much that I can think of here to talk about from the Brown side.
No, I think we covered it.
All right, let's move on to Tennessee at Miami. It was the Titans controlling the game, winning 30-17. And JJ, Ryan Tannehill was under pressure all day long. He basically didn't have a chance. Reports were that Laramie Tunsil was injured in the shower. That did not really help their offensive line at all. You could say it kind of masked their performance a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Dolphins, they only ran 41 plays yesterday. It was kind of apocalyptic. It was horrible. The only plus that I can really take away from the Dolphins side is that Ajayi saw the biggest workload pretty easily. They did stay true to their word in saying that they weren't going to run that 4-headed monster in the backfield. Ajayi saw 13 carries. Damian Williams had just 1. Kenyon Drake had 2. He was on the field for 68% of the team snaps. Other than that, I mean, maybe it was good that Devontae Parker played more snaps than Kenny Stills, which we haven't really seen over the last few weeks. But other than that, from the Miami side, it's really not looking good. I don't know how you can really have any optimism for really any of those guys. That includes Jarvis Landry right now. If you're constructing a lineup, there's just not a lot of upside in that offense.
3 targets for Jarvis Landry yesterday. That's offensive to me. I thought in the wind he might see an uptick in volume, and I just could not have been more wrong about that game, especially when it came to the Miami side. On the Tennessee side, though, I think it's pretty predictable, Jim, what's going to happen there each and every week. It's going to be exotic smash mouth, which is really just regular smash mouth, if you ask me. It just looks exactly the same as what you could expect from a regular run-based control-the-clock offense. Talk about the Titans.
Yeah, and I think that exotic smash mouth, type mentality has been super beneficial for DeMarco Murray. We've been talking about it for a while now, but we get further and further into the season, and his role just becomes more and more cemented. 27 carries yesterday, 6 targets. He played 81% of the snaps, and those targets aren't fluky. I mean, we've seen that for a majority of the season so far this year. And that gives them a better floor when the team trails, and their schedule going forward is pretty good, so it's not as if that's going to happen. But I think that easier schedule gives him a higher ceiling than he's had in the past, even though that's been fine as well. But yeah, look at other guys in this offense. I think that the 8 targets for Delaney Walker were good, but the issue is he still only played 58% of the snaps. He was down in week 4 as well, his first game back from that hamstring injury. So it seems as if he may not be fully back just yet. So I think that kind of takes him out of cash game consideration for some of those plus matchups we were discussing in the upcoming weeks. But I still think that he's a decent GPP option. And despite news of being benched, Rashard Matthews did outsnap Andre Johnson. Hallelujah. And he did have as many targets as him. I think he found the end zone. Still 4 total targets. So it's not a lot to be excited about, but, it's happening, I guess, for Tennessee.
Here's what's not to be excited about. 13 targets for the wide receivers as a group. I mean, that's just not a lot.
Yeah.
That's
more to Tajay Sharp. I mean, he hasn't gotten more than 7 targets since week 1. And I know that we talked about him being this, this potential cash game guy because of his role, but that hasn't been apparent since then. And if they're not going to throw the football, which seems to be the desire of the team, it's really hard to get super excited about it.
Yep. So that's about enough Tennessee Miami talk for me today. I just could not have been more disgusted by that game. Let's move on to the next game, which was good for the Minnesota Viking fans, 31-13 over the Texans. And JJ, Sam Bradford continues to look efficient out there.
Yeah, I was surprised at how that game kind of went. I was surprised that the Vikings wouldn't, or at least Jerick McKinnon himself wasn't able to run the ball a little bit better. Because if you look at the way that Houston's been playing, they've been able to stop the pass pretty well this season. The run game and the run stopping hasn't really been there, especially without J.J. Watt. I thought McKinnon would be fine, but he clearly wasn't. Started the game okay, and then he just kind of fell apart. And they ended up giving Matt Asiata the rock a lot down the stretch in that fourth quarter of the game. So, I think it's more of a bump in the road for McKinnon more than anything else. He still saw 55% of the team snaps, which is lower than what he's seen, but he was still on the field a decent bit. He saw 20 carries, only 36 yards again. Didn't see that close to the end zone carry. That was Matt Asiata coming in again. But, I think that overall, we can't let that game kind of overshadow who Jerick McKinnon is, what he means to this offense, because I do think that all the positive game scripts that they're going to have, he should have a lot of opportunity moving forward. And then, the big storyline on the positive side for the Vikings offense was the wide receivers stepping up. You had Adam Thielen coming in, and he saw 8 targets, 7 catches, 127 yards and a score without Diggs. Easily played number 1 wide receiver snaps with 92% of the team snaps. I just think that with the way the defense is playing, you're going to see a lot of efficiency on the offensive side. And even without Diggs, we saw that was the case yesterday.
Yep. So, very good news for the Vikings there on offense that they're getting it done without their best player, in my opinion, from a receiving standpoint, Stephon Diggs. On the defensive side for the Vikings, there's just a lot to be excited about. I thought maybe there was like a sliver of hope for a guy like Will Fuller against maybe Terrence Newman, who hadn't really faced a lot of top quality talent at the receiver position, Jim, but I was absolutely dead wrong. They're all getting it done.
Yeah, Terrence Newman's 38, but he's still working out well. So whatever. I mean, I've given up on trying to diagnose what he is. And I think that whenever you have an asset going up against this Vikings offense, there's not really going to be a ceiling. And the floor will be frightening too, just because they are very good. So I think it's hard to draw a lot from what happened for the Texans in this game. You may look at Lamar Miller's usage, see only 8 carries for him and 6 for Alfred Blue, but all 6 of Alfred Blue's carries came in the fourth quarter when they had kind of given up on that game. So, Lamar Miller has a lot better matchup in week 6. I think he's fine for that one. Dwayne Brown is now back. He did make his season debut on Sunday. That's huge for the offense. So I think that when you look at the usage of Will Fuller only having that 1 catch, you look at DeAndre Hopkins, 9 targets, which is fine. But you look at this team, I would be a lot more optimistic about them heading into week 6. I think that we can't overreact to this week 5 because it seems as if the Vikings, based on how they've done against, Eli, against Cam, against Aaron Rodgers, based on that, I think we can kind of exclude how teams perform against them when we're judging them for their forward-looking outlook.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a little bit of concern for Brock Osweiler. I mean, there's just not a lot to really love about him the way he's played so far this year. But I'm with you in general that let's not just completely abandon ship. I mean, there's probably better days ahead for them, but certainly disconcerting the play of Brock Osweiler the first couple of weeks here. So let's jump into the next game then. Let's take a look at what happened in the Washington, D.C. area with the Redskins defeating the Ravens 16-10. Boy, JJ, when you look at Mark Trestman being fired for the Ravens, I kind of agree with this move. They probably should have fed the rock to Terrence West yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, Terrence West was moving the ball very, very effectively, which is what you do against Washington. You can run the ball on Washington. We see them get destroyed by running backs each and every week. And then he sees 3 carries in the second half. I mean, it makes sense that Mark Trestman was canned today after just an awful play calling experience that we saw yesterday. For Baltimore. Steve Smith obviously left with an ankle injury, but he's apparently not expected to miss any time. And it was Rashad Perriman who stepped in and not really Kamar Aiken with Steve Smith out. It was kind of a mix of both, but Perriman ended up seeing those 5 targets. He had that 1 touchdown reversal at the end of the game, which would have been pretty insane if that would have stood. But overall, this Ravens offense is kind of what we expected, where it's just a mess in terms of the volume distribution, in terms of them lacking true playmakers in the offense. So moving forward, I just don't know how you can go into a single week and really feel good about using anyone. That includes Joe Flacco now too.
Yeah, I'm with you there, JJ. It's a little bit rough out there in Baltimore. On the Redskins side, Jim, Kirk Cousins struggled again.
Yeah, and I mean, we've kind of seen this, but I think that with Kirk Cousins, it may be more due to the weather. The wind speeds were really, really high in that game. And anytime that wind speeds get above 10 miles per hour, I get nervous about the passing game assets in that game, but they were well above 10 miles per hour. And I think that Baltimore's defense, they're pretty good too. We've seen that throughout the season. So I don't want to overreact to Kirk Cousins, but I do think that one thing we do need to react to is that Pierre Garçon's role appears to be expanding. He did outsnap Jamison Crowder again this week. He was second in wide receiver snaps behind Deshaun Jackson, and that's big. Also, Jordan Reed, 11 targets for him, his third game with double-digit looks this season. I mean, I know that we were worried about him before because of the red zone usage, but overall, I think that you really do need to be thinking pretty highly of Jordan Reed going forward.
Yep, agree with that. It's just, when you see the beginning of the season, him, just basically kind of looked like they changed the offense, a little bit differently than last year. Glad to see that he is back. Anything else on the Redskins here, Jim?
No, not really much. Just worth noting that Matt Jones only played 56% of the snaps. Based on the way that game went and the weather, I would have expected him to be a bit higher than that. They don't really have a lot of good matchups going forward. I mean, it's a tough road ahead for Matt Jones in the rushing game. So I think that just based on the final score of that game, I would have expected him to be more involved in that offense. I think that from my perspective, it's worth it to potentially lower optimism for Matt Jones going forward.
All right, so let's jump into the next game then. It was the Colts victorious over the Bears 29-23. And Andrew Luck finally got some protection, JJ. Roasted the Bears with the help of T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah, look, I don't think T.Y. Hilton's being talked enough about right now with what he's doing. He's the number 2 fantasy football wide receiver in all of fantasy football. He has double-digit targets in every single game this year. He's performing at a very, very high level. It was good to see Dwayne Allen get a little bit more involved this week as well. Scored that touchdown. He had 6 targets, which we really haven't seen from Dwayne Allen over the last couple of weeks. I think those are the 2 biggest takeaways for me. Other than that, I mean, obviously protection looked a little bit better in general, but obviously the matchup was pretty cake for Indianapolis. I think the fear going into this game was they were coming off that game in England, and usually teams take a bias. This is our first game sample of someone playing a game the week after that tough travel. Luckily for them, they were playing a really bad Bears team. So, I think that it was fine the way that the offense rolled. And again, I think T.Y. Hilton is just generally underpriced right now across DFS, and I think that he just deserves a little bit more love for what he's doing with Dante Moncrief's sideline.
Yep, getting a ton of targets. The same cannot be said for Philip Dorsett. He's basically invisible. On the Bears side, Jim, Jordan Howard comes through yet again.
Yeah, 95% snap rate for Jordan Howard, and it's similar to what we saw last week. But the thing about Jordan Howard this week is that Kadeem Carey was active, and Jordan Howard still played 95% of the snaps. He had 16 of the 17 running back carries, and it seems that this is his job for the rest of the season, just based on the way he's performed. I know that the matchups haven't necessarily been super difficult, but he's been very good, and I think that we should be excited about him and also Brian Hoyer. I mean, he has been outstanding this year. If we look at Number Fire's net expected points, he has accounted for 39.18 passing net expected points this year, and Jay Cutler was at negative 13.37 when he got hurt. That's a 50-point difference between Hoyer and Cutler. So if they're evaluating based on performance, which is what John Fox has said, it seems pretty certain that Brian Hoyer is going to be that guy going forward. And a big part of that offense will be Cam Meredith. 12 targets for him. Alshon Jeffrey's max this year is 7. I still want to see what Jeffrey's role looks like when he doesn't have Vontae Davis, which we can see going forward, because that's a big role without Kevin White there. But still, I think that there are reasons for concern for Jeffrey just because Meredith did well in that role, played 95% of the snaps. Jeffrey was just a little bit behind that. So I think that I am giving Jeffrey a bit of a pass here, and for the earlier part of the season as well, just because he was facing Vontae Davis and they were feeding Kevin White for some reason before that. But at the same time, there are reasons to worry just because Meredith did look okay in that game.
Yeah, I mean, Vontae is a pretty good cornerback, but he didn't really grade out all that well yesterday. And I'm not really ready to say that that the cornerback is really a great reason to give him a pass. I am with you, though, that Jeffrey can probably improve as this year progresses. I'm not really 100% sure he's just there's something wrong with him or some reason to get off him for the long term. But I am seriously concerned if he continues to not get it done week after week here, especially as you mentioned with Meredith's emergence here. He looked great, 12 targets for him yesterday. JJ, talk about Zach Miller in this offense. It looks like with 8 targets, he looks like a force we continue to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's only so many tight ends in the league right now that have a decently high floor, and I think Zach Miller is one of them. And the other thing, too, is that Chicago's defense, like I mentioned earlier, is not very strong. Chicago should see a decent amount of negative game scripts. And Brian Hoyer, historically, has been a pretty good quarterback in negative game scripts, where you often see splits with quarterbacks being much more efficient, scoring many more points in wins than in losses. But over the last couple of seasons, Brian Hoyer has been almost identical in wins as he has been in losses, which I think is a really good sign for this passing attack in general. So a guy like Zach Miller should definitely be on your radar each week.
Agree there. So that's about it for the Colts game here. Let's jump into the Lions versus the Eagles. In Detroit, it was the Lions victorious 24-23. And Jim, I think Matt Stafford got a little bit lucky here with his 3 TD performance. He was really just kind of passing it short, and the Eagles defense is seriously pretty stingy.
Yeah, they are. And I think that they got off to a slow start, but they really picked things up in the second half. So for Matt Stafford owners, they got kind of lucky that he got the production out of the way early. But I mean, overall, still not a bad game for the Lions offense, even if it may have been a tiny bit lucky just to do well against a defense that good. And I think it was also good for Theo Riddick in his usage. 66% of the snaps in that game with Dwayne Washington sideline. And Riddick also had 11 of the 18 running back carries. His effectiveness hasn't been very good. But if Washington misses more time, and it sounds like he may be back for week 6, but if he does miss more time and they get a better matchup, Theo Riddick's not a terrible option. Obviously, the 2 touchdowns. He's second on the team in targets with an 18.3% market share. He's a better wide receiver right now than Golden Tate. He has a bigger role than Golden Tate in that offense. So I think that overall, it could have been a worse game for the Lions. They did get the win in a tough matchup, but I think that there are a lot of implications here for Golden Tate. Anquan Boldin outsnapped Golden Tate for the second consecutive week. I know they're talking him up, but I don't see why you would have any optimism in this guy at all going forward.
Oh, but the coach is going to say he's having big games. I mean, why wouldn't he?
Always believe the coach, yeah.
Of course. I mean, I'm sick of this, by the way, with these coaches coming out and saying guys are going to have good fans. Sean Payton, and I'm not going to get into it. Carson Wentz, JJ, he acquitted himself well yesterday. And he continues to play well despite the fact that the Eagles lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's also a guy that you can look at in positive game scripts, positive matchups, as you saw with against a banged up Detroit team. So even though he was on the road, I think that was definitely a big performance for him. Probably the most tilting thing that happened yesterday from my perspective was Zach Ertz. He only saw a few targets. I think he saw 3 targets. He ran a lot of routes for them too. It was just that Carson Wentz was not looking his way. And you're playing a Detroit team that's given up the most touchdowns to that position, not just this year, but also last year, with a negative game script as well. You would think that Zach Ertz would have had a monster day. He looked fully healthy. They're saying he's fully healthy. Just kind of frustrating overall. But from more of an optimistic look, Ryan Matthews owners should be feeling pretty good, at least from a season-long standpoint. If you used him yesterday, I think that we were kind of feeling that this backfield was going to be a monster timeshare with Wendell Smallwood and maybe some Kenyon Barner as well. But Ryan Matthews still saw six more carries than Darren Sproles did, an extra target over Sproles, even with a negative game script, scored that touchdown as well. So there's at least some optimism there as opposed to where he was prior to that bye week.
Yeah, and that's the difference between fantasy and reality. In the Philadelphia marketplace here, people not all that thrilled with Ryan Matthews at the moment for that fumble. But for fantasy purposes, we can be encouraged by the usage.
Yeah.
Speaking of popular in the marketplace, out in Atlanta, Matt Ryan is a popular person leading the Falcons to victory over the Denver Broncos 23-16. It was, a dink and dunk kind of performance to the running backs for Matt Ryan, but at the end of the day, he got it done. Jim, talk about the Falcons offense and how they were able to defeat the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to blame Matt Ryan for being a dink and dunk quarterback in that game when it was being so effective. I mean, Tevin Coleman, he was reduced in his snap rate, but he still performed really well. And you've got two running backs who can excel in the passing game like that. It's going to lead to a more efficient offense. And we've seen that out of Atlanta this year. I think that you have to be encouraged about both Coleman and Freeman. The problem is it'll be hard to decipher who's going to see the more looks week in, week out. So while they do have a nice ceiling like we saw in New Orleans and like yesterday too, it's going to be hard to figure out, have a lot of confidence in either guy, I guess, on a weekly basis. And the other thing that I think was a bit concerning here from Atlanta's perspective is Julio Jones. I know that we've written off his usage before, and you don't want to look at targets against Denver because their corners are so good, but he played 75% of the snaps in week 5. He hasn't been above 80% since week 1. Part of that, I'm sure, was the injury before, but it seems as if, based on last week, he's fully healthy. So for me, I'm a bit worried about Julio. I know that the market shares get back up there again at 24.6%. Nobody else on that team is above 16%. But that snap rate for Julio, it does worry me quite a bit, even though he did have that big week back in week 4 rather.
Yeah, and I think the qualifier there is concerned as far as Julio Jones is concerned, because obviously compared to human people, he's probably going to do really well no matter what he's doing on a regular basis. It's just that we have that expectation for him that he's going to go off, and there's some reason to believe there. I can buy that for sure. JJ, when you look at the running backs and you look at how well Freeman and Coleman are performing in various different roles, I mean, is this something that we can expect to continue here with these guys? I mean, is it going to be predictable, I guess, is probably the better question.
The predictability of it, I mean, look, I think that it can continue. The predictability of it, as long as your expectations aren't super, super high and you're looking at these touchdowns as kind of like icing on the cake, as opposed to needing those touchdowns to hit value, I think you're fine. Because I do think that both these guys can give you a decent floor. More so Devontae Freeman than Tevin Coleman. Devontae Freeman is seeing 60+% of the team snaps now pretty consistently. So it's more of a 60-40 split from a snap standpoint. And Freeman saw a ton more carries than Tevin Coleman did yesterday. I don't know if some of that had to do with the sickle cell thing that Tevin Coleman had going on, where they didn't want him to be between the tackles as much. But even still, Devontae Freeman looks to be, and not only that, he's been a much more efficient runner than Tevin Coleman this year. So I think Devontae Freeman would be the guy that just gives you that floor each and every week still. His ceiling might not be where it was last season just because Coleman's more involved. But overall, yeah, I mean, look, their offensive line's playing really, really well. And that's really changing the entire way this offense is moving the ball. So I think that you can buy into the running back simply because of that fact.
Yeah, it's encouraging. I think we were concerned when we saw this was going to be a committee, but when you see how these roles are kind of shaking out here with Coleman being the surprise pass catcher, it really makes room for both of them to be successful on any given week, and it's just going to be a matter of trying to predict when that occurs. When you look at the Broncos, Jim, I don't know that Paxton Lynch is ready for primetime just yet. He struggled a little bit against Atlanta's defense.
Just proves that we underestimated Trevor Siemian, the future MVP, Trevor Siemian. Underestimated once again. But yeah, I think that we may have had a bit too much, myself included, a bit too much optimism about Paxton Lynch in that matchup because Atlanta's defense really not that good. So it may have just been that he's not – I mean, he's a rookie. We should have expected this is basically my thought process there. And the other big concern on this Denver offense is C.J. Anderson. His snap rate is down to 51.4%. It hadn't been below 66% at all this year. Devontae Booker played 41% of the snaps. His previous high was 25%. It really does seem as if this is something we may see going forward where Devontae Booker gets more involved. His carry totals are going up. I think that that's definitely a big concern. So there's ambiguity there, but there's really no ambiguity at wide receiver. Once again, Emmanuel Sanders outsnapped and out-targeted Demaryius Thomas. Also had 2 more red zone targets, which gives him 10 this year, which is tied for the the league lead rather. And his market share overall is 32.3%. So while it's scary for Paxton Lynch and C.J. Anderson, I think that Emmanuel Sanders, with each week that passes, just becomes more and more safe.
He looks great doing it too. I mean, when you watch the game and you put the tape on and watch Sanders running around out here, he looks extremely quick. He looks, quite frankly, wide open. So, I mean, I'm very happy to see Emmanuel Sanders coming through in this offense. I just hope that this trend can continue with him getting the targets and we can find some predictability in that for DFS purposes. So I think that about does it for the Atlanta and Denver game. Let's move out to Dallas, JJ, where it was the Cowboys victorious over the Bengals 24-14. And it was Easy E coming through again, proving he's a real G. 15 for 134 and 2 touchdowns, 4 targets too. I mean, talk about Ezekiel Elliott, JJ. This was impressive.
Yeah, I mean, he's becoming a cash game play for sure if he's not there already. He's going to give you that high floor each week. I think that the fact that Dak is behind center right now is certainly helping him with the read option that they can run, keeps the defensive end honest. I mean, some of the holes that offensive line were creating yesterday was out of control. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott is not, and when you combine that with the talent of Ezekiel Elliott, it's almost not fair. And then you have a guy like Dak who's able to consistently move the chains and really just play. You know, it's not even a fairly it's a fairly conservative kind of ball that he's throwing, but at the same time he's making big plays to extend drives, which is going to create more scoring opportunities for Ezekiel Elliott. So I mean, look, it's real, guys. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott's pacing for close to 1,700 yards, and I think that moving forward we have to just realize that this is it, and that he's not quite Le'Veon and David Johnson-esque, but he would be right next to them in the next tier when you're choosing your running backs each week.
Yeah, the pass catchers out there in Dallas are a little bit tougher to call on a week-to-week basis. I think it was Jason Witten driving his minivan to the lead in targets this week. Other than that, guys like Bryce Butler looking good out there, but just not really getting the action that we will need to see in fantasy if we want to try to use them in DFS most weeks. What about Cincinnati, Jim? It was kind of a rougher week for them. AJ Green held in check.
Yeah, he was. And I think that's to be expected just because it's a lower pace facing Dallas, especially when they have a lead like that. You're not going to get a lot of plays if you're the opposing offense. So I think it's more reflective of what we should do against Dallas as opposed to what it is for AJ Green. AJ Green's fine. He has 8 targets in every game this year, a 28.6% market share. So the results weren't there, but everything else lines up well for AJ Green to still be a really good fantasy asset. Brandon LaFell had 11 targets, but that was his season high and just his second time above 6. The snap rate has been there, so that's definitely good for Brandon LaFell, but it's not something I'm going to bank on a whole lot going forward. And it did seem as if the Bengals, I don't know if this was because Jeremy Hill was out, but they went with more 3 wide receiver sets because Tyler Boyd's snap rate did go back up to 71%. That's still lower than you'd want, but it is improving. And, if we see the Bengals go to 3 receiver sets more often, then Tyler Boyd would start to be in the discussion. He's not quite there right now, though. But if we look at this Jeremy Hill injury and try to figure out how that will play out if he were to miss more time, Gio Bernard played 76% of the snaps. He also had 6 targets, which was his second most on the season. And, if they don't have Jeremy Hill, Gio Bernard is going to be a focal point in that offense. I think that's the main takeaway that you can get from Cincinnati in that game.
What I like about this the most, Jim, is the fact that the Cowboys, once again, were playing their controlled style of offense. I think they had a pretty big advantage in terms of time of possession. And if we get them in a matchup against a team where the Bengals have the ball more often, and we can really see that percentage of snaps and that market share really affect Bernard in a positive way, he could be a great value. I'll be paying attention to that moving forward.
Yeah, not just him, but AJ Green and everyone else as well. That's very true. Yeah.
All right, so JJ, anything else from this game here? I don't think I have anything else from the Bengals side that I really want to talk about.
No, I think just in totality, I think that we have to kind of look at what Mo Claiborne's doing right now for that Dallas defense. He's been playing really well this season. And yesterday, he made some big plays and he, what I saw him when he was covering AJ, that was part of the problem as well yesterday, especially that great drop that Dalton threw to AJ Green in the end zone that Claiborne was able to knock away. So definitely keep an eye on that from a matchup standpoint moving forward with Dallas.
That is a definite will do. So let's jump into the next game where it was the Chargers doing Charger things and allowing the Raiders to escape 34-31. Derek Carr coming through, Jim. I really like the way that he looks right now. He's kind of starting to emerge.
I don't know why. I find it so hard to buy into Derek Carr, but he keeps proving me wrong. And I mean, it's hard to really take too much away from that game just because the Chargers secondary is so banged up now. It wasn't just for Rhett, but Flowers was out too. So that really helps the Oakland offense, but they took full advantage to their credit. Amari Cooper, a season high 12 targets for him. He's now back up to a 24.6% market share. And the good thing for Cooper, too, is that he did see 3 red zone targets. The problem is he has 4 red zone targets this year, and he hasn't caught a single one of them, which could potentially be why we've seen them prefer Michael Crabtree in the red zone. But he is getting the looks at least, so that's a little bit encouraging either way. And I guess the ambiguity still persists in the backfield with Latavius Murray out. DeAndre Washington played 51% of the snaps, which is higher than I would have expected going in. But he only handled 9 of the 23 running back carries. He had 6 targets. Jalen Richard, 32% of the snaps, 7 targets for him. Even once you take one of those running backs out of the equation, it's still hard to decipher where the carries are going to go. So honestly, I'm kind of out on this backfield entirely until we see someone, whether it's Murray when he's healthy or Washington or Richard, start to see more snaps on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, I technically Cooper caught like 3 of those red zone targets, but they just didn't count. Unfortunately, for guys like me who had a whole bunch of them in our DFS contests. But by and large, the Raiders on offense, you mentioned the running back splits. Hopefully it gets a little bit more predictable than it is right now, JJ. I mean, I really wish that we could have seen somebody take the lead here in this game, but it sounds like they're going to go with that hot hand approach. They're going to allow Olawale to vulture in the red zone. It's just going to be kind of difficult to call. But maybe I'll ask you about the Chargers instead. Talk about Phillip Rivers, extremely efficient.
Yeah, Phillip Rivers has been solid because they've seen a lot of plus matchups without Keenan Allen so far. Dontrell Inman still is seeing the most snaps at wide receiver in this offense, and he's not seeing a lot of targets. And I'm pretty sure that Dontrell Inman just sucks. So I'm just to that point. I mean, Tyrell Williams is the bigger bodied guy that Rivers seems to be looking at closer to the red zone. And he scored that touchdown yesterday. Travis Benjamin saw a lot of targets yesterday, saw a lot of volume. He had that one play where you saw his speed running down the sidelines. It was ridiculous how fast he is. But I think that we're seeing kind of a carousel of weapons in that offense each week where we're not going to feel very confident in them, and therefore they're just naturally going to be more GPP plays rather than cash game plays.
Love Tyrell Williams, sending the Iron Throne, representing House Tyrell. Absolutely loving him as a play week to week. Hopefully he stays cheap too, because he was just like 4,700 this week and really got it done if you played him in your stacks of that game. Travis Benjamin, you mentioned 11 targets, and Jim, Melvin Gordon sucks out again.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you look at Melvin Gordon, I'm still holding out hope for him. That fumble was bad, and the fumbles are concerning, especially when they're happening during the game. But he played 90% of the snaps. He had 16 of the 18 running back carries. His one target was discouraging. It was his lowest number since Danny Woodhead's injury. But if we look at Melvin Gordon, based on Number Fire's metrics, he has really grotesque splits based on whether or not King Dunlap plays their left tackle. He has a 44.4% success rate when King Dunlap plays, which measures the percentage of plays on which he increases the team's expected points. Big average is around 40%. So when King Dunlap plays, he's actually above average. Without Dunlap, it dropped to 22.9%, which is it's half. So watch that injury report. Dunlap has had migraine issues, so I think even though he played in week 5, we can't be certain he'll be good going forward. So watch Dunlap, make sure he's active pretty much every Sunday because he really seems to be an important member of that offensive line.
Yep, it's certainly a trend we have to keep our eyes on because it just seems that Melvin Gordon has really no place to run week to week here with these injuries on the offensive line, and hopefully that can change because he's certainly getting the volume that we'd like to see from him. All right, so let's jump into the next game here. It's our annual roasting of Jeff Fisher, I should say weekly roasting of Jeff Fisher. The Bills 30-19, and JJ, Jeff Fisher fake punted himself towards 8-8 again.
That was so awesome. It's like he was trying to get to 8-8, and he runs that play. That was, I just needed them to just throw one offensive line on the line of scrimmage like the Colts did last year against the Patriots, and it would have just been perfect. But look, the Rams offense, again, really, really inefficient, really not fun to watch. Todd Gurley is going to save his day with touchdowns. The one positive with Gurley right now is he's seen 5 targets in those last 2 games, but the Rams needed a Benny Cunningham injury for them to start using Todd Gurley more in the passing game, which tells you enough about this Rams coaching staff. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. So if Benny Cunningham's active, then we can't even feel optimistic about Todd Gurley seeing work in the passing game. So really, the whole offense is just completely avoidable right now. Tavon Austin saw 10 targets, but Tavon Austin saw only 59 yards from those 10 targets. A very Tavon Austin game. So, like I said, it's just an offense that you cannot trust week in and week out.
I saw Chris Liss on Twitter. You mentioned this. I want to mention here on the show. How bad must Jared Goff be if he can't get in the game over Case Keenum? How bad does practice have to be? He has to know a lot less than where the sun rises if he can't get on the field right now. It's brutal. It's unwatchable, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Talk about the Bills. Jim, it looks like LaShawn McCoy is back.
Yeah, and this is something we saw last year, too, is that his floor was so underratedly high all of last year, and it seems like it's there again this year. Yeah, I know that the rushing has been there, but he also has a 15.4% target market share this year. He has at least 15 carries and 2 targets in every single game, and he's played at least 69% of the snaps in every game as well. So when you look at LaShawn McCoy, there aren't a lot of guys. I mean, he's not in that same David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell tier, but his floor is, in that next tier. So I think that LaShawn McCoy, they're getting the ball more in the passing game too with Sammy Watkins out, which is certainly encouraging. And we need to be looking at LaShawn McCoy whenever they are in decent matchups. And then looking at the receiving game, it's 6 targets for Robert Woods, 22.8% market share. But the problem is when they're not throwing the ball very much, that 22.8% market share is pretty underwhelming. So he's going to have viability at times if they need to throw more often. It's just hard to get excited about him, Marquise Goodwin, Charles Clay, anyone in that passing game, unless they're in situations where they are absolutely forced to throw the ball more often.
But hey, welcome back, Justin Hunter. Got in the end zone. I mean, this guy was pretty assuredly out of the league like not more than 2 weeks ago, and now he's in the end zone. So happy for him that he can at least get a shot here in Buffalo with their depleted receiving core. And that's about all the Bills-Rams talk that I can stomach at the moment. So let's move on to our final game of the weekend. It was the Packers beating the Giants 23-16. It was JJ the Packers running this slow, methodical, 36-minute brand of offense that we absolutely hate for fantasy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that had to do with the injuries that they were facing on defense, where Sam Shields has been a big piece to that secondary, and with him out, you don't want them to be able to exploit that with OBJ. They obviously were able to hold the ball and not allow the Giants to be on the field, which then helped them win. I'm surprised that this game wasn't higher scoring than it was. I think a lot of people are. There was a lot of inefficiency, a lot of drops in the game. Richard Rodgers could have had a touchdown. Jordy had some drops. I mean, it was just a really sloppy game all around. Randall Cobb was the only wideout that really stepped up, but I think part of the reason that Cobb was able to do what he did was matchup based. It's really, not only were the Giants a little bit depleted in their secondary, but also, if you get a slot guy or a guy that can maneuver in the middle of the field against the Giants, you can really take advantage of that, which I think is part of the reason that Cobb went off the way that he did. I still don't think that Cobb is a trustworthy week in, week out guy just yet. And to be honest, just given the way that this Packers offense performed, especially at home, especially against a defense that's been kind of reeling, I mean, I'm not feeling that great about the Packers offense after last night's performance overall.
Yeah, it was Jordy Nelson catching just 4 of 13 targets. If I'm reading this correctly, that almost doesn't even look real to me. Devontae Adams is completely benign. It's just like every single week this guy continues to bore me to tears. Anything else here on the Packers offense, Jim? Because the way that JJ laid it out, it's just kind of disappointing.
Yeah, and I think that we need to watch Eddie Lacy. I know that he left the game with that ankle injury. He said he'd be fine, but if they go to James Starks, he has had 24 carries this year. We discussed Melvin Gordon's success rate being 22% without King Dunlap. James Starks this year is at 12.5%. He's only had 3 successful carries the entire year, which is abysmal. So I know that we don't base efficiency and outlook of an offense on a running back often, but if they're without Eddie Lacy, that is actually going to hurt their offense because James Starks is so horrendous.
JJ, Eli Manning did not have a good showing yesterday, 18 of 35 for 199. Talk about what's going on here with the Giant offense. In theory, with the garbage receiving core they had last year, they should have been somewhat improved this year, and that's just has not been the case.
I think part of it might be that OBJ hasn't been able to move around as much just because there's a little bit more of a crowded wide receiver situation. I think some of it is that Eli Manning has been an inconsistent quarterback throughout his career, and we're just hitting kind of a lull in his production right now. But yeah, I think that there's definitely issues. There's no running game either in the offense. There's absolutely none. It's non-existent. There's a timeshare going on that doesn't make any sense. I just think all of that combined is kind of creating this monster, even in what looks like a fairly plus matchup with, like I said earlier, without Sam Shields. Now their defense isn't playing as well, so you're not getting the right scripts that you would want from the offense.
Yeah, so the Giants just disappointing us here yet again. We'll have to talk about them more next week because that's going to do it here for our review portion of the show. Jim, any final words for the people as we look into week number 6?
No, there's a lot of fun running back matchups. Don't overreact too much from week 5, especially with regards to the Houston Texans, but hopefully it should be a good week going forward.
All right, guys. So very much appreciate you watching our show today. For JJ Zacharyson and for Jim Sonis, I'm Chris Jamina. We'll see you next week.